Okay, so this is my first impressions video of the modded QooCam 3 Ultra. The mod itself, as many of you have seen on Reddit and other social media sites, comes in three options. First option is to purchase the mod kit itself and do the modification yourself. It'll take a couple of hours. There's no soldering involved, so it's fairly straightforward. It's just there's a lot of very delicate steps and wires along the process, but it definitely can be done without too much experience. The second option that's available now is to send in your camera if you already own one and have it modified for you, and then they'll ship it right back. That's another option. And then the third option, which is what I did, is just purchase the camera and the mod at once directly from the modder and have it shipped out to you. It took a couple of days, and he has various different shipping options and speeds available depending on what you need. And so kind of first impression so far, I'm very impressed. I previously owned the CAF Vicens and was actually unfortunately very disappointed in that product. And I decided to sell my camera in order to fund and purchase this modded camera instead once I saw the sample footage on social media and was able to view the files directly on a headset. I was very impressed with the image quality and a lot of the issues that the CAF Vicens camera had, which a lot of them are still not addressed or resolved, such as the frame stuttering. Another issue that I've had with the Vicens is the variable frame rate. Even though there's an option to select 30 frames per second, the camera doesn't actually record in 30 frames per second, at least since I last owned the camera before I got rid of it. Even though it allowed you to select that frame rate, it was actually doing a variable frame rate, and various members on the Reddit group have been able to confirm that and verify that looking at the metadata. It just caused sporadic stuttering of frame rates, especially during motion. They did get a chance to address the sync issues between the left and the right eye, which were very visible during high-speed motion scenes. But again, it was just unfortunately a disappointment. And this camera has so far delivered on all the things that have kind of fallen short on the Vicens side. And so the mod itself is very straightforward. The camera itself has been modded to have the two lenses on the front so that it can shoot VR180. The process of filming is pretty straightforward. You can record it handheld or on a gimbal. If you use it handheld, Kandao has an unofficial version of its software that can process the VR180 footage, which is another great bonus. And you can take advantage of the internal gyroscope to stabilize the camera, and it's actually quite effective. It's probably in line with or very close, or in some cases probably better than putting it on a gimbal, just because the 6-axis, the gyro has a lot of stabilization features that come across extremely smooth and can help with that vertical up and down wobbling of gimbals, which is typically more pronounced when you're using a gimbal and you're walking. You see a little bit of that vertical up and down movement. You don't see it as much, but again, it's either on par or just as good as using a gimbal. So the handheld feature of the camera has been really handy when you don't have anything to stabilize it with as you're out and about. I personally added this grip to be able to hold it a little bit more securely with one hand. I'll show it on this position. As you can see, the grip itself actually hides a little bit behind the camera with the angle there at the bottom of the base plate, which allows you to hold it with a full grip and still not have your knuckles or fingers protrude in front of where the lenses are. And again, the fact that the mod uses this 3D printed housing at the front that extends the lenses like about 1.5 inches, maybe 2 inches past the front of the camera also helps a lot. Even if you hold it with your hands without any sort of grip like I have, most likely you will still not be able to see your fingers. Ideally, you'd probably want to hold it from the sides just to make sure, depending on the size of your fingers, because you are getting quite close depending on how much your fingers stick out. At this point, you could probably see the bottom of my finger, so I wouldn't necessarily hold it this way myself. I would hold it from the sides, but again, holding it for an extended amount of time like this can also be kind of tiresome on the fingers. So this little handheld grip, it's just the generic camera cage kind of base plate with a handle on the side. It's allowed me to install this 40-watt light that actually folds down quite nicely. It's actually in the folded down position. That's why the lights are currently facing me or the back of the camera, but you would just flip them and then you'd be able to target the subject that you're filming and light them quite nicely from an elevated position from the camera, which is also a little extra added benefit. So it's been quite nice. I like the camera so far. Again, I'm not going to go over any of the technicals. There's a ton of videos and information online and on the forums and on the groups regarding the camera. I think we all are quite familiar with it. For those of you that have been following the project, we're familiar with what it's capable of, all the features and advantages that this system has. Probably one of my favorite things is the USB-C port on the side, which I utilize an external SSD drive here on the front that I can connect to and record directly to an SSD drive instead of a micro SD card internally or its internal memory. It makes the transfer of footage and even editing from the SSD drive quite a smooth process. It also allows for power delivery through the SSD drive. Let me pull that out. So this is the SSD drive that I've been using. I'll put a link to these products on the description of the video for any of you that are interested in. So this has a magnetic strip here at the bottom. You tape that metal ring to the front of the camera as you see on mine, and then that allows you to quickly attach the hard drive and then the cable run through the side here, just connect directly to the USB drive, and you can see it starts taking up power from the camera already. And then from the other side, you'll see that I have two 90-degree adapters for the USB-C cable. The one at the top here is what's going to the camera, that's for the data. And then this bottom one that has another 90-degree adapter is actually open currently, but you can use that to plug in power to the camera, so it powers the camera as it's being used and recording on the SSD drive at the same time, which is probably my favorite feature. I know it looks a little bit funky. A lot of people have made some references as to what this camera looks like. Various different robots from films and media. It does look quite funny, but I think it just adds a little bit to the overall charm of the camera. I've always been a fan of 3D media. I've had a few 3D cameras. I've gone through a few different VR cameras, such as dual GoPro setups, K1 Pro, K2 Pro, and currently using the Canon R5C with the VR lens, and that's been so far my favorite. But this option here with the Kandao QooCam 3 Ultra is the perfect, I think the perfect kind of everyday VR system that you can take with you either on trips or to just film around with the family and friends. It's incredibly lightweight. Depending on what kind of jacket or pants you're wearing, you may be able to put in a pocket, but I personally would recommend having a little pouch or a little backpack to put it in. It does come with these 3D printed they look like TPU lens covers for the lenses, so that you can put it inside of a bag and not worry about the lenses getting dirty or scratched. I think everything so far about it has been positive from my experience. There have been a couple of things that I would have to nitpick as far as negatives with the camera system that I found out, and no fault of the modification of the camera itself, but probably the one thing that has been a bit of a nuisance with this camera is actually a feature of the camera itself, and nothing to do with the actual modification, which is the kind of the power cycle settings of this camera. I've found out through their customer support that this camera doesn't actually fully shut down even though you press and hold the power button for at least 3 seconds, and it gives you that prompt on the screen that it's shutting down. It doesn't actually power down completely as any traditional electronic device would. It goes into kind of like a quasi standby mode so that you're able to just quickly press the power button again and it'll boot up immediately. I'll try to demonstrate that here. As you can see, the camera is off, but if I press the power button just once and briefly, you'll see that it'll boot up almost immediately, as if, oh, I think I pressed the mode button, but yeah, there we go. So when you press the power button once, it boots up immediately. It's ready to record, which is a great feature if you don't mind. It's just been a bit of a nuisance for me because if you're not able to fully shut down the camera, it is drawing a little bit of power as it stays in that standby mode. And their customer support has confirmed that it will be doing that for at least 8 hours. So it'll be staying in that standby mode for about 8 hours, and then after that, it will power down itself fully at that time. And I'll demonstrate here. I'll press and hold the power button and you'll see the shutting down message on the screen. And normally in any sort of electronic device, at least the ones that I've used essentially most of my life, that usually means that the device is completely powered down. But as you can see, there's still power being drawn from the camera to power the hard drive, which you can see it's on the green status light. That means it's powered up and ready to go. It'll stay that way. Again, it's not a deal breaker. And again, it has nothing to do with the mod, but it's a feature of the camera itself. I don't know if they'll have a firmware version upgrade that would address that and actually power down the camera, just because it's a feature that some people may actually like to be able to quickly turn on and be ready to record on a moment's notice. Again, it's not a deal breaker. It doesn't really drain the battery that much, but it is something to be aware of, that if you decide to turn it off, just be aware that it won't be shutting down completely. And because of that, there's another issue that I have with the camera regarding the whole power situation, and that is that one way to force the camera to fully shut down is to swap out the battery or take the battery out. So right now I've shut down the camera. I'll put back the lens covers here. But according to their customer support, one way to force the camera to go into a full shutdown is to just pull the battery out or swap it. And so when you do that, now technically the camera is completely shut down because I pulled the battery out and put it back in. But with this, I've noticed that this camera is kind of hardwired to go into that quasi standby mode. And one of the things I noticed is that whenever I would try to force the camera to just fully shut down, especially before going to bed at night, just so that it's not on for 8 hours before it shuts down, I've pulled the battery out and put it back in to force it to go into that proper fully shut down mode. And what I've noticed is that when you do that, the camera actually will turn on by itself sometimes a few minutes after you pull the battery out and put it back in, which is a little bit annoying because it then goes into the on status, and sometimes I haven't caught that until I hear the fan kick in, which by that point it's been maybe 5 or 10 minutes of the camera, because I put the camera face down, and so I can't see the screen when it turns back on by itself. But I will see the status indicator light in the front here light up, and then, or I'll hear the fan of the camera kick in because it's starting to warm up. Again, those are specs and features according to the manufacturer and their customer support. They said that the camera is designed to do that. You're not really meant to be taking the battery on and off to power cycle it or to turn it off on purpose without it naturally going into that kind of that deep sleep after you shut it down, and then for 8 hours it'll stay on that kind of quasi standby mode, and then it'll fully shut down. It's not meant to be forced to shut down by taking the battery out and back in. So the camera, as you do that to try and force it, like I was playing around with it, it will auto turn on by itself after having its battery taken out and put back in. And again, it's not a deal breaker, but it is something to be aware of, especially if you do happen to swap out the batteries. You definitely don't want that camera to just sit there without being supervised, because it will stay on and it will drain your battery, and it'll probably overheat, especially if you throw it in one of the shelves or somewhere in a bag or something where there's not any airflow and it's turned on. You definitely don't want that to happen. But other than that, again, I'm being really nitpicky here. There's not much else that I can really point out. So going through the camera and the recording settings, I think my favorite settings so far as far as recording, even though the 5.7K footage at 60 frames per second is extremely smooth, there is a little bit of fidelity loss on the image overall, going down from 8K to 5.7K. So I think from my experience, I prefer the 8K at 30 frames per second. It's just a little bit sharper and of a cleaner image overall. So I tend to lean towards that 8K 30 frames per second. I use the 10-bit HLG Pro color range profile. I don't use the dynamic range boost. Video segments, I have that closed. Bit rate, I keep it high. Microphone gain, I keep it high. Another setting that I look at when recording, obviously, is the fan settings here. I use silent priority, so that'll keep the fan running, and it'll kick into a higher RPM when it needs it, even if it's during recording. There are a couple of other options that you can do. Silent recording, which will keep the fan either at a low or off state while you're recording, and then once you're done recording, the fans will kick in and you'll hear them right away. They're a little bit loud, but it's cooling down the system after you're done recording. Personally, I don't like that mode because I tend to record larger segments at a time, so 15, 20, 30 minutes. And so I prefer to not have all of that heat build up during that entire time, especially if I end up going for 45 or over 60 minutes. I'd rather avoid having to have the camera overheat and shut down in the middle of a recording than just have the fans kick in whenever the camera decides that it needs them. Even if it produces a little bit of extra noise. Most of the time if I'm recording, I'm outdoors, so there's already plenty of ambient noise and it's loud enough already where if the fan kicks in, it's not gonna make that much of a difference. So I'd like to keep it in that mode. Other than that, all the other settings are pretty straightforward. The rest of the settings are gonna be involving the exposure. Again, I tend to record a lot in controlled lighting environments, so I will typically dial in all my exposure settings. I'll go on manual and then choose my ISO, my shutter speed, and my white balance. But I've found that even on the auto mode, you get very good exposure overall. You can set your max exposure on here. I typically record at 30 frames per second, so I'll either have it at 60 or 120, especially if I'm going to be interpolating the footage. Another thing that I do like about this is the option to select either highlight priority or shadow priority. And because most of the time I'm either recording in controlled lit environments, or if I'm outdoors, or especially if I have this external light here on top of the camera, I tend to go to highlight priority, especially if I have a light on top of the camera. That way the subject that I'm recording is most likely going to be closer to the camera, and the light will have, there'll be more light on the subject in front of the camera, and so I'd rather make sure that I'm not clipping any of my subject with the light. So if you keep it at highlight priority, it'll ensure that your subject will remain exposed well, versus the opposite. If you go to shadow priority, then most of the stuff in the background might be in lower light, and it'll try to prioritize that darker area and clip your subject in front of you. So again, my favorite's been highlight priority, and then do an auto, and then the camera just pretty much does everything well. It does fairly good auto white balance and overall exposure when you're outdoors. If you're in an overall evenly lit low light environment, then I would switch to shadow priority. That way it boosts up all the shadow detail, especially in your subject, especially if you don't have a light on them like this setup here, and they're all just kind of evenly low lit, then you'll want to go and do the shadow priority. But when you have a light, like in this case here, that's going to be directly on your subject, I would prefer to just use highlight priority. Or if you're outdoors in the sun and it's a bright day, then highlight priority will ensure that your subject, if it's in direct sunlight, will not be clipping during your recording sessions. But again, overall, it's been a really positive experience. This camera, there's a lot of features with this camera that unfortunately the other kind of commercially available standard vanilla 180 cameras like the CAF Vicens or the Slam Cam, they unfortunately have just not been up to par. This camera here has been able to deliver on kind of the expectations that we all had on those cameras. We all kind of expected a spiritual successor to the Insta360 Evo, which a lot of us had and loved. And so this is so far has been the closest and best spiritual successor to that Evo experience. Again, the fact that Kandao has released an unofficial, technically official software, separate software, parallel software to support specifically this 180 format has been a game changer for those that want that ease of use experience. You just load your footage in the software and it'll automatically do everything for you. That's not something that we get even with commercial products. I personally remember the R5C having issues with the VR utility software, having issues during the launch period where it was basically unusable. It didn't support raw footage for I don't know how long. And so just being able to have a member-driven modification of an existing camera and then having that unofficial support or official support from Kandao with that parallel software release of their studio software to support fully this camera with gyro and everything else has really been a positive experience so far. And again, this camera, I can't fault it in any other way. The image quality, the gen lock between the two eyes, perfect syncs, even with 30 frames per second at 8K. The interpolation is fairly clean. Again, that has nothing to do with the camera. It's just 30 frames per second, but at least it's a constant 30 frames per second, unlike the CAF Vicens, which had variable frame rates, and so it was just kind of all over the place. This is truly a static or a constant 30 frames per second, which is just that alone has been a huge upgrade as far as the visual fidelity. And again, this is 8K. This camera is well known for its performance as a 360 camera. It's a very well regarded 360 camera. So again, taking that experience and that feedback, that positive feedback from everybody, being a 360 camera, it fully translates to the 180 world with this modification. So everything that you love and appreciate of this camera in the 360 format has been perfectly translated to the VR180 format, and everything's carried through. Again, there's features in this camera that not even the Canon system have, like the ability to be able to record on an external SSD drive. I wish the Canon system had that. But again, it's just been an overall positive experience. If you're interested, or if you're on the fence, or if you're considering purchasing either the SlamCam or the CAF Vicens camera, again, just looking for anything as far as a VR180 system under $1,000, you cannot beat this system with either of those two cameras. Those two cameras have too many faults and shortcomings compared to this camera. This is exactly what I was hoping the CAF Vicens was supposed to be, and it wasn't. And fortunately, this came along and really filled in that gap. So any system below $2,000 for an affordable VR180 system, this is your system. This is what's available, at least for now, unless another manufacturer steps up and releases a stock VR180 system like the Canon prototype that's been teased for I don't know how long now, and really hasn't seen the light of day. Again, this system cannot be beat at this price point. So if you're on the fence and you're considering either the CAF Vicens or the SlamCam, I would stay away from them. I know that they have been releasing firmware updates and they've been improving the experience and the cameras, but again, as far as the CAF system goes, and I last had it about a month ago now. That's when I sold it. There were still kind of deal breaker issues with that camera that you just don't have in this. Again, so if you're willing to either do the modification by yourself and you already own this, that's the smallest barrier to entry price point of $99, and then you can go all the way up to ordering the camera directly from the modder himself and have it shipped to you modded and ready, just like I did. And that's been kind of the overall most seamless and less involved way to get your hands on one of this camera systems, unless you want to do the work yourself or already own one and want to have it shipped out to have the mod completed for you and then sent back out, which is also a very good alternative. But again, I just want to thank the community and the members and everybody involved in not only the modification of this system, but also Kandao and the team behind the parallel software studio that they released to support this camera fully. It's already seen a revision, so there's already a new software version of the studio program that has the kind of the bugs of the prior software release. One of them specifically affected me. The previous version of the studio software was actually not compatible with 20 series NVIDIA GPU graphics cards, and I still have a 2080 Ti. So that created visual artifacts on the footage when you try to render or export the footage using the software. That has since been addressed and is no longer an issue. So even in the short couple of weeks that I've had this, Kandao is already releasing updates on their software to address some of the bugs and issues on the rendering and processing side. It wasn't necessarily a huge issue for me because I've been also learning and playing with Mystica Boutique, and that's been my experience so far. But for those of you that just want kind of a point and shoot, click and go render solution, the experience itself with the software, you just drag and drop your footage, export, turn on and off some settings, apply some LUTs if you want some color grading, and you can export that and everything will be done for you automatically. Other than that, again, I can't recommend this mod more highly, especially with the other options that are available. You'll definitely not be disappointed. The software support has been great from Kandao. Hardware support from the modder. I'll include all of his links on the description of the video if you're interested to reach out and talk to him. He's very responsive. If you have any questions, even after receiving the camera, you can always reach out. And he's apparently up 24 hours a day, because there hasn't been one time that I've reached out that I haven't seen that he hasn't been online and responding to questions and offering support. So again, big shout out to the team behind all of this work. I'll add all of their links in the description. So if you're interested, you can reach out and get one for yourself. Again, everything about it is just exactly what I think a lot of us were expecting and waiting for these more commercially available VR180 camera solutions. And unfortunately, those fell a little bit flat, and this one has really been able to fill that gap of what a lot of us, even those of us that already own other systems like the Z-Cam systems or the R5C VR or the other VR Canon combinations with their new lenses and camera options, that kind of low entry price point of $1,000 or less. This is exactly what a lot of us were looking for. And if you are looking for as I said, that spiritual successor to the Insta360 Evo, this is that camera, at least for now, unless manufacturer releases something officially that meets those requirements. It doesn't get any better than this. So again, I can't recommend this any more. This is I can't praise the work, the quality, and the output of this camera more than we all have so far in all of the various different groups that most of you, I'm sure, have already come across on social media. Again, I'll put all the links in the description for those of you that are interested, and hope you enjoy.